Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to the Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Julia.
And I'm Stephany.
And we're a mother and daughter who love reading and talking about books. The ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Mom.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good.
Good.
I'm happy to be here in the Book Snug for another 3 Peas in the Pod.
Yes, me too.
Welcome, friends.
Hi, friends.
Thanks for joining us here in the Book Snug. Whether you're returning listeners or are new to the Book Snug, we are so glad you're here today. We're doing another one of our special shows in a series called 3 Peas in a Pod. And in these shows, we always invite a very special guest onto the show. They pick a book that we all read before we get together, and then we talk about the book on the show.
It's like a fun little book club.
Yeah. We do talk spoilers when we are discussing the book. This week, we are going to be talking about Outside by Ragnar Jonasson, who is an Icelandic mystery, crime, thriller writer.
Yeah.
If you want to read the book and haven't read it yet, I recommend that you skip this episode, read the book, and then come back and listen later at your leisure.
Yes.
I also want to let you know that as we discuss the book, we use the call pile rating system to kind of organize our thoughts. The call pile rating system was designed for readers to be able to rate their books pretty effectively using detailed information.
We can link the original one down below.
Yeah, it was designed by a booktuber called Book Roast. But we just use each category to help us discuss the book in detail.
Yeah.
And we'll go through that a little bit more when we get to the book discussion. But I think right now what we should do is welcome our special guest. Welcome, Jay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Jay is a very special person to both Julia and I. He's been my friend for over 45 years. I have loved him for most of that time, and I've been married to him for almost 32 years. So Jay is my husband. I'm so excited for him to be here. He, of course, is also Julia's dad.
Hi, Dad.
This makes this quite interesting today.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually about time that I think you got on here. We've mentioned you so often on the show that I think it's so cool now that you're finally here.
I have waited patiently.
Before we get into who you are as a reader, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you want our listeners to know about you?
Sure. This is exciting for me to be with two of my most favorite gals in the world. So to talk about books and what we like to read and a shared story that we read together was exciting. I'm a physicist, so I'm boring. I just do scientific things. That's part of my job for the last 30-some years. But personally, I really enjoy sports, being outside. And so this kind of ties into some of the answers I will give, that a lot of my young life, I was active outdoors sports, and I didn't read much. It wasn't really till graduating from college and getting out of the study environment where I had so much to read and going, well, I don't mind reading. And then I started to pick up some novels and read. So for me, reading was something I didn't really jump into a lot until I was probably middle 20s or later 20s. So my life before that was always involved in activities and sports and being outside. So I'm excited to chat today and answer some of these questions. It really made me go down a road of thinking about what I've read in my life and why and how and everything like that. So let's get on with it.
Okay.
I want to interject though really quick. As you were talking, Dad, I just was reflecting on how cool of a childhood it was for me, and I think for Mark and Aaron too, growing up in a household, seeing you both read at the same time. It taught me at least that reading is a hobby that you can enjoy, that it is good to enjoy. And then also the fact that I don't think you ever obviously rolled your eyes at Mom for bringing more books into the house, told me that that's an okay hobby and collection to have. So thank you for that.
But you say
haven't been in the house the last couple of years,
Well,
so
this is true.
you say hobby. There's a fine line between hobby and sickness, and so there's this. There is this line between: do we need to build our own library, a 20 by 20 building out back?
Of course,
Yes.
you always
to
do.
house all the books.
Instead of a she shed, we just need a
We
library
just need a
in the shed.
library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my defense, I have just gone through a huge culling of my books and unloaded a ton. Now, every book I own, I can put on a shelf and see, and I'm getting
wow.
rid of a lot of them. So,
Bravo.
yeah.
The
Sticking with
library
my-
will be getting a large donation. But that's all good. Someone
It
else can
is.
enjoy and read them.
Yes,
true.
I want the books to go to somebody who is going to enjoy them.
It's
Yeah,
just
that's
funny
right.
because now I'm getting ready to purchase a really, really big bookcase. So
Are
it's
you?
just a funny different phase of life.
Well, hey, we have a few boxes if you'd like them.
If you want
I
books
have
to
too
fill
many to
your
begin with.
shelves. I was thinking too, Julia, when you said about how your dad and I have kind of represented what reading is for you. We did a lot of reading together as a family, mostly through audiobooks. But as a family, we have traveled ever since you guys were little because it's something that your dad and I really love. It's where our extra money always went to, was to go see the world, enjoy the outdoors, tent camp, whatever.
Camping,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anything
And
and everything.
in our traveling to and from those places, we often listen to audiobooks. And some of my best reading experiences have been the books we've listened to as a family. So
Yeah, and I come from that side of being the one who's driving, so I'm trying to focus on getting us to where we're going. But we're in a very, very important part of Inkheart, and I almost have to say, stop the book a minute. I want to pull over. I want to just listen to the book. You all are in the back, just eyes closed, just experiencing the story, and I'm trying to, what's my next turn? Where are we going? But at the same time, trying to enjoy the story.
Yeah.
I have some stories that are emblazoned in my mind relative to highways I was on.
yeah,
Because
very
of where
true.
I was driving when
Right.
when we were listening to that story.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think about when we did Girl with All the Gifts on the way to the
Yeah.
Adirondacks and all the
Yeah.
heated conversations we had with that in the car.
yeah.
Well, first of all, I remember choosing that book because you guys were all teenagers, and I thought, what can we all listen to that everybody will enjoy? And I heard about this book, and I heard it was really intriguing. I had no idea that it was horror.
no.
And it's body horror on top of everything
Zombies.
else. I know.
Yeah.
But we all loved it. We all loved it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
that was
I
quite
know.
an
I know.
experience. Yeah.
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 And it's interesting. Again, we go out on that journey, and you put the CD or the DVD, CD at that point, in the truck, and just like that. Even though it's all these roads that we're familiar with until we get to where we're going, but you're just lost,
Yeah.
and you're lost in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Helps to make a drive go faster.
It does.
It sure does.
That's what's true.
We listened to some great books. You
Yeah, we
mentioned
did.
Girls with All the Gifts.
Yeah.
I think Peter and the Starcatchers.
Yeah.
Inkheart, with two different Inkhearts.
Yeah.
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 We did a lot of, Cindy Lou became the GPS because of a book we listened
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget exactly what that book was, but I
Yeah.
remember that was,
Yeah.
that came from that.
Just some really, really good books.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, what we're going to do now is Julia and I are going to alternate asking you questions about your specific reading tastes and habits. I'm going to start. And the first question I have for you is, what is your main motivation for reading? Meaning, do you read to learn things? Do you read because everybody else is reading a book and you want to know what they're talking about?
No.
Okay. Do you read for entertainment? Like, just tell us why do you pick up a book?
Yeah, I think entertainment is probably the top, because one of my answers further down, fiction, what I enjoy reading, what I started reading most. So I think for me it is entertainment. I'm looking to do something that's entertaining. But there's a 1A, 1B, and that's personal growth and learning a new skill. So there are quite a few religious books that I like to read on apologetics regarding Christian faith. But as an older person, taught myself to go hunting, whitetail hunting, how to butcher my own deer, taught myself to smoke. So I've started smoking meat and stuff like that. And those were all skills that were learned from first picking up a book and reading. So for me, there have been life lessons and skills that I wanted to learn that I used a book to read. And that comes from that, but entertainment is the primary.
Sure.
Definitely.
Okay. If you could read only one genre for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It would be is my current go-to. I love espionage thrillers.
Sure.
Yeah, I do. That's what I like to read. There are several authors. Mystery or suspense is in there. I mean, that's why Outside was chosen, partially. But I love the espionage thriller.
Sure.
And that goes to a favorite book and a favorite author later and why.
Okay.
But espionage thrillers, I think, are it. Yeah.
So is there any genre, any author, any type of story that you absolutely will never pick up? I mean, I feel like it's a broad question.
It's a very broad question, and probably the one that stumped me the most to try to put my finger on one that I don't like as much. I think I would probably say fantasy, just straight fantasy. I like sci-fi. And some of the earlier books I read, Space Odyssey, 2001, 2010. So some very early sci-fi that I enjoy. And we've listened to some audiobooks that are sci-fi that I've enjoyed. Project Hail Mary. But I think that just fantasy, where the whole world is just absolutely make-believe, and where you spend so much time trying to make up this world, for me, it's just not as much of a draw in a story. It's kind of odd. I like escape. I read to escape. But when I escape, I like an espionage thriller that's tied to things that I can see happening in the real world, per se, which is a separation from true fantasy. This is a absolutely make-believe world.
I must be in a memory lane type of mood today, because as you were talking about fantasy, do you remember when we were reading Eragon and we were going to the beach and you guys all pulled us back into that back room to finish the book with us? Like, I remember that very fondly.
Memory.
And that's
Memory.
Eragon was fantasy.
It was. I'm not saying it's that there are not certain times, but it's just not.
You would never just reach for
inherently seek it out. This would come by.
I think that's
this
very
would come
true.
by you or someone else I know or trust in their reading and what they have read and my interactions with them to say, I think you'd really like this book. And then I would be okay picking it up. I'm not going to walk through a Barnes & Noble or through a bookstore and go,
in their fantasy
that's
section.
the fantasy section. I'm heading right there. Right?
Yeah. I believe that. That sounds right.
Yeah.
So then, what is the most important to you? Character development, plot, writing, or message?
I think for me, that's a very hard question, but I centered on character development.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the point that I want to, I can read a story that doesn't have that great of a plot, or it's not maybe as believable a plot. But if the characters are human and real, if they're developed well and they seem like real people that are struggling with real things, going through real things, I can put up with a plot that might not be as deep or as rich, or a writing style that's not as great, because I've connected in an escape story, the reason for my entertainment escape, to get away. I've connected with someone and I can experience certain things that they might be going through as a character in the story. I at least can relate to, because they, as a character, are relatable.
Okay.
And not every character has to be relatable, but the main character or one of the main characters has to be at least remotely relatable as that character is developed. What their hidden thoughts that are relayed in the story, their history, the problems they've dealt with, whatever it is to get to who they are as a character are developed. I don't like being preached to in a story, right?
Neither do I.
I love getting to the end of the story and going, that was a really good story. And you know what? There's some really deeper things to mull over and think about. This has been my one subtle dig back at you, Stephany. You read a book, drop it, put it down, and the next day, boom, you're on to the next book sometimes. And I'm like, whoa, time out. There were things in this book that I need to mull over and process, and I want to think about. And for me, starting a new character, starting a new series of characters, and a new plot isn't right. I want to let that other story marinate. It may have no other meaning. I may be pulling those meanings out myself, right?
Well,
Right. But in hearing that story or reading it, I start to really mull over, there's a deeper message here, or there's something to think about that is a foundational thing about humanity or how we as humans address or deal with certain things. And the author may not have intended that, but wow, hey, I got that from this book. I can't do that if I go into the next book. So I oftentimes think through that in length after reading even just any story, a Baldacci, Brad Thor, it doesn't matter. And so that to me is part of why character development probably is the greater thing.
Sure.
I don't want to be preached at, but I don't mind if there's a message that's very subtle and hidden, or you're dealing with very difficult topics.
Well, it almost seems then like theming or underlying meaning in a book is important to you.
It is. And I guess I never realized it quite that much. I can read a story and say, that was a great story. But the ones that really stick with me are the ones where there was something you had to address as the reader. That if you really read the story, you realized this is really touching on a nerve of humanity or society or culture, and it's difficult. And yet it wasn't preachy.
Yeah.
You weren't having a soapbox being shoved down your throat.
Right. Yeah.
You just read a story and then you realize, oh man, he's touching on some tough things.
You mentioned that characters are important to you. Do you have to have likable characters?
No.
Okay.
No, I think for me, it's probably more they have to at least be real.
Okay.
Like, can I see that bad guy as really being like that bad guy? Yes, I can.
Okay.
But can I see sometimes that there's a human side to him and he's not always bad, and yet that's a part of a character flaw or a demon that this person carries that makes them who they are. I don't have to have the knight in shining armor in every story.
Okay. Well, tell us about a favorite book that you've read that has stuck with you.
Wow. Anything Tom Clancey, just because that's where I got started, was Tom Clancey.
Do you have a favorite of his that you like?
I've had a hard time picking one. And I think there are a lot of reasons for the time in life, the 90s, some of the Cold War things, his writing, The Hunt for Red October, things that occurred there, the Patriot games with, we watched the movie with Sean Bean in it where they're trying to, take out the Queen and everything and the character that is in the intelligence of the United States. But I think the books that are written in such a way that they really tie into what's going on in world history. It's not a nonfiction work.
Right.
But the characters are so well written and established that this could be happening today in our culture, in our time. And Tom Clancey did that really, really well.
Yeah.
And it oftentimes, though, dealt with espionage or with terrorism or with the things that as a culture we were dealing with. Still are today in many ways. But I had a hard time going, that's my absolute favorite.
So we would just say Tom Clancy books are probably your favorites of all time.
Yeah.
I think that's an acceptable answer.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, that's definitely a name that I grew up seeing all over the place here at home. So I would agree with that.
And for a while, because most of his tomes were lengthy, 600, 700, 800-page books was not uncommon. And back in the day where you get paperbacks, but I get hardbacks. So start to look at a volume that's 3 inches thick, and you go, "Wow!"
You can't hold it with one hand anymore.
No.
Yeah. Do you have a book that you recently recommended to somebody else?
Yeah, outside. Oh. I told you guys you had to read it.
That's true. And you did recommend that too while you were reading it at the beach. So, okay.
You just gave away one of my answers, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, did I?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Do you have a least favorite book?
This one was a struggle too. I'm not a big DNF person. I usually just try to really glean if I'm going to read this book. And once I pick it up, I want to finish it.
Okay.
But early on in our married life, I was reading a Dean Koontz book, and I don't even remember the name. Tried to research it for this, and I couldn't find it. But early on in the book, a young man, and at this point, you and I were just very young in our marriage, is on a hike with his girlfriend, and we hiked quite a bit. They were up on a ranger tower, and he just got this sensation that he should push her off, and he did. And she landed on her back and was on the ground, but wasn't dead. And he calmly walked down the ranger tower, walked over, stood over top. This was his girlfriend. Looked at her while she's gasping and can't breathe and is dying, and walked off. And it was so visceral a sense of evil, a sense of whatever that he had created in that book, but because of my own personal experience of where I was with my young wife and loving her, that I couldn't comprehend just a random thought through your mind. Hey, let me push this person off of this tower.
Yeah.
And it being his girlfriend.
And following through.
And I had to stop.
Yeah.
I had to stop reading the book. I just, it was not good.
So then a book you dislike that everyone else seems to love.
No idea.
Yeah.
Because for me, we chuckled when you said, "Oh, a book that everybody else is reading." I said, "No, that's the case." I like to this day, I have not watched Titanic.
Neither have I.
Right. So,
neither have I.
Everybody, Titanic. No, I'm not going to watch it just because of that.
Is that where I get it from?
Yes.
It's contrary.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is genetic. See how that
contrary.
works? Now you
Yeah.
have an excuse.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, and you also you stay in your lane.
I stay
with
in my
reading,
lane.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what other people are reading to you. You're just picking up what you love.
I'm quite rigid that way.
Yeah.
I know what I like, and if I'm spending money on the book, and if I'm going to spend my time on it, I want to know what I'm getting roughly.
Yeah.
And I just don't willy-nilly pick
Yeah.
up all kinds of things and just read anything and everything just because somebody else is reading it.
Right.
And then I go, oh, wow, everybody else loves that, and I hated it. I just...
Yeah. I mean, I think the only time that you deviate from what you like is if I do an audiobook and I say, I think we're going to enjoy listening to this together.
Right,
and then
right.
occasionally those will be books that were really popular, like Project Hail Mary or Dark Matter, True Grit. I mean, that was a great book, and that was totally outside.
And
what
I
you
had
normally
never read the book, but I'd seen 2 or 3 different versions of the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's true. But I just prefer to read what I know I'm going to enjoy, so I don't have the breadth of, well, everybody else loves this book, but I hated it.
Right.
I think there's definitely times in some of the different character lines that Baldacci, I like Baldacci quite a bit, where the rating for that book among other readers was maybe a little higher than I would have given it. It's still a really good book, but I don't know that I would have given it that rating. But that's not, wow, I hated that book.
Yeah.
And everybody else loved that book.
Right. Well, you mentioned Tom Clancey earlier. Do you have any other go-to authors or favorite authors that you are almost guaranteed to pick up their newest book?
I think I have 2 or 3 other authors. The first would be Mark Greaney. Mark Greaney writes similar genre as Tom Clancey. He has a character called the Gray Man. He actually mentored under Tom Clancy. So some of Tom Clancy's last works, if you actually see, it's written with Mark Greaney. And then as Tom Clancy stopped writing and passed away, I think there might have been a Tom Clancy series novel or 2 that were actually written by Mark Greaney.
Okay.
Oh, exclusively. But his character, the Gray Man, I really enjoy that character and that series. And pretty much he writes in a very similar style and way as Clancy did. So I enjoy him. I've always enjoyed Brad Thor.
Yeah.
He has a character, Scott Horvath, a similar kind of a character to the Gray Man. I also like Baldacci, but Baldacci has a whole gamut of different characters.
Yeah.
Former military who's now like a policeman and does investigations. And this is one of the books that I read that I alluded to where it wasn't preachy, but the underlying theme of that book was disturbing enough that it really made you contemplate and think about.
Okay.
And it had to do with unspoken acceptance of exploiting children, children being sexually abused when they're younger, and then what that leads to in the adults who are those children in that culture. And so there are a handful of different characters. Baldacci has an ever-expanding list of different characters, and there might be 3, 4, 5, 6 different books in the line of each character. Most of those different character lines for Baldacci I enjoy. In fact, I have in the queue, I have 2 or 3 for each of those lines, and I'm waiting to get through another read or 2, but that are on my to-read list. So Clancy is no longer, but his heir apparent is Mark Greaney.
Yeah.
Greaney, Brad Thor, Baldacci are definitely within the realm of fiction that I enjoy fiction. That's where I think I would focus on.
What are you currently reading?
So I just said I like fiction. What I'm currently reading is Why We Love Baseball by Joe Pasnowski. This was a Christmas gift.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
Stephany gave me Christmas gift. I have played baseball from the time I have. See how I say it? I even said it that way. I don't currently play baseball, but I did from the time I was 6 through college. I had the pleasure and the enjoyment of being able to play at the college level. Coached both of our sons that played for 12, 14 years in coaching. And baseball, from the time I was 6, was in my blood. There were 2 or 3 years I played on 2 teams. Midget team at 16 years of age and a Legion team, which was high school based, 3 to 4 nights a week, a game, doubleheaders on Saturdays and Sundays, to the point that I wore out my right shoulder. But I love baseball. And this book is so interesting because I read to Stephany the other day, the opening page or two, where Joe talks about the fact that, he's relaying an event from 1888. Think about that, 1888. Yeah. And he says, realize Wrigley's gum did not exist. Coca-Cola did not exist. Hershey bars did not exist. The game of basketball hadn't even been created yet. And yet there was a national understanding of the major leagues and baseball, and it was the national pastime.
Yeah.
So the history of the game is so much deeper and richer than any current sport.
Yeah.
And there are so many things that are tied to our cultural understanding of America. And so it's really a book about 50 key moments. And he admits you can never have 50. There's way more than 50. You're going to disagree with my 50. And it's really not 50. It's 108, because he has these little here are 5 of the most magical plays, 5 of the greatest home runs.
So he slips other things
in there, but it's things that are just so a part of why baseball is a part of our culture. 60s, segregation, Jackie Robinson, post 9/11, the first games played in New York City after 9/11, and a Yankee hitting a home run. And the psychological and emotional release of the nation, even though people weren't Yankees fans, seeing the first baseball game start up again and a Yankee hit a home run in a key spot, right? So things that transcend sport, and that's what this book is about. It's so cool.
Sure.
So cool.
Well, I was going to ask you if you're enjoying it, but
That's it.
I know you are. Yeah.
It's a little obvious.
That's a little obvious. Do we have 2 hours? Oh, okay.
You could just start reading it to us.
Right.
I have it right here. Should you like to? Yeah.
When you pick up a book and you're reading it, are you going to reread it, or are you a once and done?
I'm a once and done for the category of entertainment, the novels that I read. I don't usually reread a Baldacci or a Brad Thor. I do reread portions and sections of the nonfiction. So a religious apologetics book. I'm always rereading my books on smoking meat. I can always
Little
they're getting
Yeah.
kind of dewy pages because I drool as I'm reading.
The ribs that you make are so good. So I mean that.
Keep reading.
Yeah.
So you
keep
keep
reading.
right on reading.
Yeah.
yeah. This year I'm looking to hone the brisket recipe. So
Yum.
I reread nonfiction. I tend to not reread the fiction.
So the next question would be, what book do you reread the most often? Or are you most likely to pick up over and over again? So are we assuming that it would be your smoking books, or is there something
the Bible
else?
is excluded from this?
The Bible is excluded.
Yeah.
Because I think by default we know
By
that's
default,
standard.
correct. Yes, the smoking books, and
Do you have one in particular? I mean, maybe our listeners would be interested.
Well,
in
there
hearing
is
what
the
you have to
Brisket
say.
Bible. There's another one that is a really good history of how brisket is. You said the Bible. You didn't say the Brisket
I was going to make
Bible.
a very snarky comment and decided to withhold it.
Yeah, understood. So I will be rereading several of those.
And you keep doing that. You keep
Yeah.
going.
Please
going.
don't stop.
Okay. I have been looking longingly at my smoker sitting out there on the patio.
Well,
and
we're getting to the right time of
Hey,
year.
spring is springing,
exactly-
man.
It's
Yeah,
exactly
it's
right.
time.
Yeah.
It's exactly right.
Okay, moving on,
Moving
away
on.
from the smoked meat.
Do you consider listening to audiobooks reading? I think that question has been answered.
Well, you're not
but-
going to like my answer. I don't think I for a long time would say no, it's not reading. You're listening.
Right, with your ears.
When you watch a movie, you're not reading.
No.
Hold on, that just broke my brain a second.
However, I have enjoyed many stories with you, both of you, and everybody.
Yeah.
On the trips camping.
Yes.
Your mom and I have listened to several really good stories. I drive for my job. And I have only probably on one occasion ever listened to an audiobook while I drive for work. And maybe that's because I'm getting my mind right for where I'm going to a client. I might drive sometimes 2.5 hours one way for 4 or 5 hours of work, right? So I can have a 10-hour day where I'm on the road for 5 hours. I could go through audiobooks like left
Oh, you
and right.
could, yeah.
But there's something about work that has made that very difficult, and I've never done that. And so my earlier answer would have been, not reading, but we have listened to quite a few books that I've enjoyed the story, and I never turned one page.
Right.
So, firstly, you broke my brain by the analogy of a movie isn't reading either, and I'm having a very hard time.
Is that what I heard hit the floor?
Yeah, boom, it's all gone. But the second thing is, I'm kind of the same, that up until recently, I haven't been listening to audiobooks. And I think it's because when I want to read, I want to sit down, I want to get cozy, I want to be...
Look at the words with your eyes.
I want that experience.
Yeah.
But I have found I found that if I'm doing other things, like if I'm running errands or if I'm cleaning the house, things that I have to do, putting on a book makes that enjoyable as well. So I agree with you that listening is not reading, but I think I'm kind of coming around to... It's not reading, but I can kind of get the same.
Right. I answered the first question. Do you read for entertainment, escape, knowledge? And entertainment was my answer. We watch movies to be entertained.
Yeah.
But we can listen to a story to be entertained. But it's not reading.
Right.
I'm digesting and enjoying that story, but I'm not reading it. It's being told to me. Which is like a movie. When you watch a movie, you're getting the gist of that story through visual and through the dialogue of the characters. Yeah. But you didn't read that story.
Book.
Right? So there's this weird kind of splitting of a hair on it, but you get to experience, and I think that experience is different. When you can close your eyes and just listen, the world you make is different than when you're actually reading it. It can be. I don't know. They're different. They're never going to be the same.
Right.
But
I think it's semantics in this question.
Sure.
Because when I take a step back and think about that question, the term reading means looking at words with your eyes, following sentences, and then allowing your mind to comprehend. Whereas listening to an audiobook is totally different. You're taking the words in through your ears. That's a whole different process.
Yes, it is.
I think for me, it's the experience or being, what's the word I want? You're being exposed to the story both ways. Like if somebody came to you and said, can you explain to me what happens in Beauty and the Beast? You can do it. Whether you read it with your eyes or you listen to it with your ears. You've experienced the story in some way. Yes. But if you're taking this question at face value, audiobooks are not reading because you're not doing it with your eyeballs, you're doing it with your ears.
But you made an interesting statement, which I think is exactly why I kind of split the hair the way I did, is that you said you've still experienced the story. And I'm just saying that experiencing that story by reading it is different than experiencing it by listening to it, is different than experiencing it by having watched the movie. And that's why we have arguments over, is the movie better than the book?
Julia's raising her hand.
So I think that we have an interesting example here, right? Because you guys both read the physical book of this, but I listened to this.
Yes. Yeah.
So I got how they were pronouncing names differently than how you guys are going to read it. So I think it's a matter of how do we want to experience the story.
Yeah,
that's right.
Especially when we're looking at like fantasy or things like that, where there's very interesting words or names, or like in Emily Wilde's with Haransvik.
Yeah,
I would just go reading it versus like hearing it is going to be different. So it's just a matter of how you're experiencing the story.
I am very prone to listen to books that are written by Australian authors or English authors because I want to hear the accent, or if it's a book that has a lot of French or Spanish in it and I have no idea how to read that, I like to hear it.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, because in those cases, sometimes too, with a hard to pronounce, I'll make a shortcut name in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find yourself almost glossing over that.
Right.
And yet when you hear, if it's a book of a different culture, different language, you hear, and not that, Australian versus English, but you hear it in that person's tongue, and you hear the way they say it, and you hear, idiomatic phrases and statements in their own culture. You get a much different feel culturally about what's going on in the book than me with my own brain short-circuiting a word that's hard to pronounce or that I don't really understand and putting into its place just a placeholder so I read through it. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the only one that does that, but
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, it's the same, like, I won't read a memoir, but if I can find an audiobook with the person who read that, like by the person who wrote it, I'm going to listen to it because then I get their intonation. So I just finished
They're telling you their story.
Their
I
story.
just finished an audiobook that was read by the author, and there was a section where I could hear her getting teared up, and that added a lot into my understanding of the story versus like if I had just read it.
If you had read the memoir, you would have had no emotion, but you actually hear her voice. You know that this was a deep part of who that person was as a person, or that was an important event in their life. Yeah.
So
Very good point.
Here's a question for you. I know you don't keep track of books read or anything like that, but if you, hypothetically, if you did that, would you count audiobooks towards your count of books read?
I probably would, because I wouldn't count it as books read. I would count it as stories experienced.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, I listened to David Copperfield by Charles Dickens last year, which was well over 30 hours. It was a huge investment of time. Yeah. And
a lot of dishes with your headphones in. I'm saying, Stephany, what's going on?
Baseboard, a lot of painting baseboard and stuff like that.
Earbuds in, world out. Mom was not paying attention.
I know the story inside and out. I would count that as a book read.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Again, fighting over the word read versus experienced.
Yeah.
But
And I think what we're getting at too is this comes down to a personal preference of how we're absorbing a story.
Right. I mean, some people, like my mom, struggles greatly with listening to audiobooks. Her mind wanders when she puts the book in her ears. I don't have any issue with that.
Right. Yeah. See, and this is this goes back to exactly. I'm a lot like your mom that way. I think I have a 2.5 hour drive for work. I have 2 MRI units I have to test. I have a radiation safety meeting to go through. I work as a nuclear physicist and radiation safety officer. Those things are on my mind. It's really hard to focus on a story when I'm trying to mentally get prepared and align my thoughts for the day, right? So I have all these hours. I spend 40 to 50 hours a week in the car driving. Yeah. I could go through audiobooks like there was no tomorrow, but it would challenge the way I've oriented my life around my job, that I use that drive time to mentally prepare for things I'm doing for work, not do that.
Plus, it's white space. You need white space. Your brain needs it.
Yeah. Well, and your job, Dad, is very detail-oriented, requires a lot of specific thought, that having that clear head is 100% needed versus just coming out of an espionage thriller into looking at scans of, like, it would be a hard
It would be hard. And so, mentally, the mental weight, that's why I've not done it. And that might be part of my answer. But yet when we go out to the cabin, 2.5 hour drive, or when we've been on vacations, your mom and I together, running somewhere to get away for a weekend. That's when we've enjoyed some of the. It's taken us longer because, I have a hard time just sitting in the living room listening to an audio.
Yeah, I can't do that either.
I fall asleep,
right? So we've focused it around when we're driving or going somewhere. So some of those books have bled out over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And so there's an answer of when and why, I guess, that I'm okay with an audiobook, but it's not a primary go-to, but there are definite reasons why I think there's value and there's beauty in it. And your description of a memoir and hearing the author actually get choked up in certain sections totally changes what you're hearing about that, because you actually, trying to develop emotion and fear in a mystery and suspense and get people on edge is what the author's trying to do.
Yeah.
And without needing it, you hear a voice quake just a little bit. And the whole rest of that next chapter, you understand that part of who they are as a person so much differently. And you can't, you're only going to get that in an audiobook. Yeah. Right. So.
Okay. Well, that was a very interesting kind of side topic that we got on there. The last few questions that we're going to ask you, Jay, are just popcorn questions. Julia and I are going to quickly go back and forth. You can give us one-word answers if you want to. The first question is, do you prefer fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
Hardback versus paperback.
Paperback. And leaning toward a Nook now. A little bit of both.
Do you prefer to buy your books or borrow?
Buy.
Do you use bookmarks or do you dog ear?
Bookmarks.
I think this last question you already answered. Do you read books to completion, or are you okay with not finishing and putting them aside if you're not enjoying?
Other than the one Dean Koontz, I usually read to completion. But I do have a general, you watch a bad baseball game and that's 3 hours of my life I'll never get back. It's the same with a book. If it's a book I really don't like, I'm not going to waste my time.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I tend to glean on the front end before I start.
Right. Yeah.
So then, tell us why you picked outside for our discussion today.
Absolutely. As a family, we take trips to the Outer Banks. It is one of our most favorite places on earth.
Yes.
And that usually involves, in the weeks leading up, preparing the reading list
Of course, it's a necessity.
at the beach, by the pool, on the deck, what will I be reading? Right? Everybody does this.
Everybody does it.
And I had a list with me, but early on in our stay, we went out for our morning smoothie, and then we went to the old Corolla Village, which is up in Caratuck. And there's an old village there, but most of the homes are shops or different things. And one of those is a bookstore, a beautiful little bookstore. We went into that bookstore and, maybe I'll get something. I have to compete with Stephany, who's going to buy 3 or 4 books, right? I can't walk out of there with nothing. I have to find something. And I just by happen chance came around the corner and there was the employee and foreign recommended stories. And right near the very front was the book Outside, Ragnar Jonasson, Iceland. Oh, I'm intrigued. As we know here around this table, in 2018, we took a family trip to Iceland.
Yes.
Spent 8-9 days there. Did some pretty
Longer
extreme
than that.
hiking.
Extreme hiking.
Extreme hiking. We also, again, because I was the driver, took a drive up through the middle of the island, through Iceland.
Called the Highlands.
The Highlands. And there are rated roads. We had a 4-wheel drive Volvo, but we had to stay on the main track. And then there are different roads that go off into the middle of this looked like something from Mars.
It looked like Mars.
It looked like Mars, like the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
This was the summer. So all of this was just
Rocks.
gray rock.
There was some
Water.
snow. in
There was
places.
some snow in areas, and the
Yeah.
streams had this chalky, eerie green-blue color to
Yeah.
them that was just
Gorgeous.
mystical,
Yeah.
right? But we drove, and we drove for an hour and a half one way up into and just kept going. We're like, where does this go? Right? This book its setting is a little further on the East Coast.
Yeah.
We were more mid,
Yes.
but it's in the moors and the highlands
Yeah.
in the wintertime.
Fall, like late fall.
Late fall,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but on the front side of winter,
Yeah.
Yeah.
where you could still catch snow.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading this. I'm okay. I'm intrigued. I got to read it. And so the interesting thing is that it's basically during a blizzard, the whole
Yes.
storm.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in our rental on the beach. It was the coolest probably time we'd ever been in the Outer
Yeah.
Banks.
Yes.
I'm in the rental, in the air conditioning, looking for a blanket, reading a book about a snowstorm blizzard
yeah.
in Iceland.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just intrigued. And it was a mystery suspense. What's going on?
Thriller. Yeah.
Thriller. And so I thought, well, both of you have been in Iceland. You've
Yes.
been in the same trip I was,
Yes.
hiked over glaciers and everything, and got stuck in the wilderness and felt like we were out in the middle of nowhere.
We definitely did.
We did all of that.
We definitely did.
And if we did that, we should read this story.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why. I read the inside cover. I read about it. I read the description that the employee who read it had given. And then because it being Iceland and where it was positioned, I said, I got to read that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did a little bit of research on Ragnar Jonasson. He is an Icelandic writer, probably the most famous Icelandic
That's what
writer.
I saw too.
And he co-founded the Reykjavik International Crime Writing Festival.
Nice.
Called Iceland Nor.
Which sounds like so much fun.
It does. Let's go.
He is an interesting character. From the age of 17, he had translated, I think, 14 of Agatha Christie's novels into Icelandic.
So his history and his joy in writing comes from translating Agatha Christie and
so
crime
he
and suspense.
must have been an Agatha
Steeped
Christie
in that.
lover.
Yeah.
He's world renowned, but he doesn't just write. He's a lawyer. He practices in Reykjavik, and he teaches at Reykjavik University. So he's a very interesting man.
Yeah.
I fibbed about Ragnar. He has a law degree, but he's an investment banker in Reykjavik.
Okay.
So he's got his fingers all over the place and all
Yeah.
kinds of little paint pots. But
I think you'll find that I think Baldacci is a lawyer. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of people that had other training and in their experiences began developing or seeing storylines and just became a writer because they enjoy the creativity part of it. Yeah.
Well, before we get into our book discussion, we haven't talked about what we're drinking today. And that is because we are doing something a little bit different than we have in the past. Usually we have tea or water. I think we had a mojito when we talked about Dune. But because our book is set in Iceland, we decided that we would do a little toast.
I decided this, by the way.
Yeah.
An Icelandic liquor called Brennivin, which we have had before. We brought a little bit home with us when we were in Iceland the first time.
Yes.
And this past fall, when we went to Wales, we had a layover in Iceland and we picked up a couple more little bottles.
Yeah, I already knew with 3 peas in a pod that I was probably going to do outside. And knowing it was in Iceland, when we had been to Wales or we were traveling to Wales through Iceland, and we stopped in the airport, I said, I have to get a couple of these so we can do this for the outside discussion. It would be perfect.
Yeah.
So Black Death.
It is called the Clear Black Death.
Yeah.
It's supposedly, and I'm just saying supposedly, Icelandic signature spirit. It's made with Icelandic water. If you've ever been to Iceland, you know that the water is delicious. I don't know how else to say it, and
pure.
I don't know why it's delicious, but I still remember how wonderful it was drinking it.
You could drink right out of the spigot and it was amazing.
Yeah.
Right out of a stream.
Right out of a
Yeah,
stream,
well,
right
we did that
out
a
of
couple
Lake
times.
Thingvellir. Yeah.
Well, that's in the story.
Yes.
Armand says,
Well,
just
that's
bring
true.
an empty bottle because
You can
just
drink right
drink
out
out
of
of
the
any stream.
streams.
And we did.
Yeah.
We did.
Drank water right off the glacier.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We did.
We did.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's made with Icelandic water and caraway seed, which is one of the few plants that grow naturally in Iceland. So it doesn't have a whole lot to it. It's a very unusual taste, has almost like a licorice
Like a
taste
black
to
licorice
it. Yeah.
almost, yeah.
So we thought we would do a little toast and have a sip. The toast for Iceland is skål.
Skål.
So how about if we tink and drink? Okay.
Yeah.
Skål. Oh, man.
You want some more, Julia?
No.
It's actually not too bad.
I have another little one right here. We can-
Yeah.
Oh, that didn't make it any better.
Yeah. None of us are huge liquor drinkers. So, it's
thick in
really
my
getting.
Well, if we need a chaser,
Yes, please.
I also picked up a little Floki. Now, Floki is like the original settler who came to Iceland. So I do have a little single barrel whiskey here, chaser of Floki. Should you like to knock back some Brennivin with a little Floki?
It's too early in the morning for this nonsense.
All right, then.
Okay. Well, while Julia is
Dying?
getting a chaser for her Brennivin, I thought I would just talk about the call pile rating system and do a very brief synopsis of our
That's
story.
much better.
Buck up, little girl.
I breathed in wrong, but that's much better.
The call pile rating system, as I said earlier, was created by a booktuber. Her channel is called Book Roast, and it is an acronym for several different categories that she uses to evaluate the books she reads as far as ratings. But we use it just to help us break down the story in an easy way that we can talk about it and cover everything. Call pile stands for characters, atmosphere, writing, plot and themes, intrigue or interest, logic or relationships, and enjoyment. So we are going to work through each category, talk about each one as much or as little as we want to. And then at the end, we'll give an overall rating. The synopsis of Outside, I'm just going to do a very brief synopsis because we'll get into it in more detail when we talk about the plot. The book opens with 4 friends who met in college, I think.
Two were high school friends.
2 of them were high school friends, and then 2 of them have another relationship that we'll talk about later. But the 4 of them become a group of friends in college, and there's also another person who's in the group who is not present at the beginning of the story.
Yes.
They decide that they are going to go away for the weekend after having not really seen each other for a long period of time. One of the characters lives in England now, so he has to come back to Iceland. And they are doing this outdoor weekend where they're hunting for ptarmigan in the eastern highlands of Iceland.
Ptarmigan being a bird.
A bird.
Ground bird.
Yeah.
They go out, they hike out, get involved in this big surprise blizzard and end up at the shack. They have to break the lock to get in, and when they get in, there's somebody in there already who is making everybody very uneasy. There's no phone, there's no heat, they're just out of the element, so it's not a good environment.
And they're totally unprepared.
Right,
They
not
didn't
prepared.
bring anything with them.
Right.
No.
They're prepared for hunting and hiking, but not for cold weather or being stranded.
Yeah.
So the one woman in this whole friend group takes one of the other guys with her, and they're going to go to another shelter that's nearby that has a phone that they can actually contact the police. On the way there, she hurts her leg and she goes back to the original shelter, and the guy continues on to see if he can get to the shelter. She comes back to the shelter and bad things happen.
Yes.
And that's the whole rest of the story. So that's all I'm going to say now. We'll get into the details, like I said, as we work through Call Pile. Anybody want to add anything to the synopsis?
No.
Nope. Feel pretty good about that?
Yeah.
Okay, well then let's there are a couple things I want to say first. This was originally written in Icelandic. So it was translated by Victoria Cribb, right?
Crib.
Okay.
Yes. CRIB.
BB. And some of the issues I had with this story, I think, are translation related. Like I had some issues with awkwardness of the writing, and that probably had to do with translation.
And some of the dialogue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
This is a thriller. So I thought I would just define what a thriller is so everybody is on the same page with us, and we can talk about, is it really a thriller? Does it meet all the requirements? Thrillers are fast-paced. They're full of conflict. They have tension, suspense, and unexpected twists. They also have high stakes. They usually happen in a short period of time in like a pressure cooker situation where people are isolated or they can't leave a situation. They make the readers feel anxious, unsettled, and you're eager to read what happens next. So thrillers are always defined by how they make the reader feel, and they should feel stressed, anxious, nervous. They're usually dark, they're usually engrossing, and they are suspenseful and plot-driven. So those are the things we want to think about while we're talking about the story.
And for the most part, yes.
Yes, I would answer yes to everything there. Well, let's open up our discussion by talking about the characters. And I think first we should just name them. We have 4 main characters, and then we have the 5th one that I alluded to, who isn't actually in the story, but he is definitely a plot driver for the story.
And I would argue the dude in the house, too, would act as a 6th one.
Yeah. He also does not have a name.
No, and is not a big active role.
Yeah. So our first character is Daniel.
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 That's how they're saying it, so I'm going to be
You
annoying.
give us
I'm
the
so
pronunciations
sorry.
and we'll
Daniel.
use them.
Okay.
Daniel.
I'm so
So
sorry.
tell us about Daniel. Who is he?
Daniel is I said Daniel.
Yes, you did.
Danielle. He is the character who lives in London at this point. And in the group as described is probably the most attractive guy, but in high school, coming out of high school and going to college, was into acting and enjoyed acting. So his profession is chasing an acting career, so to speak. And he has left Iceland and his friends behind and is trying to make it work in England as an actor. But you get the underlying details that he's not been that successful. Right. And he's not very successful in love interest and keeping a girlfriend. And he currently has one, but he's just a fledgling, floundering actor who currently lives in London.
And feels like he needs to lie to his friends about his
A
success.
deep sense of insecurity.
A deep sense of insecurity.
Yeah.
Also,
Also,
they all exhibit that.
right. He also comes across as cowardly, or his friends interpret him as being
Yes.
somebody who doesn't actually.
Have the guts to do anything.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Even the hunting.
right. Yeah.
Because of all of them, he is least prepared to hunt. He said, I'll just come along, but
Yeah.
he had never really fired a weapon before.
and not really interested either.
That's right.
Which I have lots of things to say about that later on.
Okay. So let's talk about Gunlauger.
Mhm.
Did I say that
Yes,
right?
you did.
Okay.
Gunlauger.
I think his is
Gunlauger.
the easiest to figure out how to say.
It looks correct.
So what do you want to say about him?
He was a tricky character for me. So it sounded, from my understanding, he was seemed to get the most short end of the stick throughout life. And in the story, he's almost presented as the pity friend, the friend that people include because they feel bad for him.
Yeah.
They just can't tell him to go away.
Right. And I don't doubt that there might have been a true relationship between him and Daniel because they were the ones that I think were friends.
They were
Before.
from elementary
Right.
school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But it didn't ever seem that it was an equal balanced relationship.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's a lawyer.
Yes.
But he's presented as like a mid-level lawyer who just
Right, low level.
low level. Just
And he's a lawyer because he failed 2 medical exams in medical school and
Right.
could never
Yeah.
go into medical school, so he went to law instead.
he doesn't go beyond. He doesn't give anything more than he needs to. He's very unsatisfied with his life.
Mhm.
He has some interesting characteristics. He comes across almost like a prude in the concepts of like right and wrong, and yet he's a former alcoholic.
Yeah.
He's a rapist,
Yes.
even though he's never been tried,
Nobody's
charged, or
yeah.
he was charged but never tried.
He's got a lot of darker sides.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's and he has a thing for the next person we're going to talk about, and probably would have tried it on with her if he could have gotten away with it, because there is a scene early
Well,
on
Early
all
on.
but
where he
tries it on.
goes
Yeah.
into her bedroom.
Yeah.
So he's got this very interesting like push and pull in his character.
I think with Gunlauger, the insecurity is the easiest to read. I
Mhm.
think he knows that he's the pity friend.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what drives a lot of some of the other actions, and that
Yeah.
he's trying to prove himself to everybody else. And whenever that comes out of insecurity, it's always done wrong.
Right. He's also very
And he-
suspicious of everybody.
Again,
Well,
I have things to say on that.
Yeah. I mean, the side of his character and the revealed side of his previous rape and how that is now being used against him really leads to a picture of him being psychologically and emotionally in torment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet the only person he's ever really known as a friend is Daniel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the other 2 characters, which we haven't touched on, this loose cadre of 4,
Mhm.
but because Daniel was the one who
Mm-hmm.
was never told him to bug off,
Mhm.
but he really comes across as just really tormented and really struggling with all aspects of life.
Mhm.
His
Yeah.
career, previous acts,
Yeah.
previous things he's done to people,
Yeah.
his own inability to fit in. I mean, his own alcoholism. He just seems very tortured
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
My heart went out to him the hardest because I couldn't relate with that, but I have seen people be like that in real life, of
Yeah.
just not really feeling accepted, but not wanting to find a place that you are accepted, because then you lose what you know.
Yeah.
So I just felt bad for him the
Yeah.
whole time.
Oh, that's an interesting. I did not feel bad for a single person in this book, so
And-
I find
I didn't
that
like
very
any of them,
interesting.
but of Gunlauger, I felt
the most.
Yeah.
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 And yet he has brought virtually all of that on himself.
Right. Right.
Failing exams is nobody else's fault.
Yeah.
No.
Raping another girl by getting her drunk is nobody else's
This
fault.
is true.
Right. So a lot of those things,
Mhm.
but they flow out of early adolescence and school. You don't get that story development,
Mhm.
but you do get the perception that he was someone who never really had friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Even Daniel puts up with him.
Just
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah, he endures him,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Our third character is Helena.
Yeah.
How do they pronounce it?
Helena.
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 She was the most enigmatic to me. There's not a whole lot there to go off of, except that she had someone that she loved desperately, almost idolized him as a god. I don't know if that happened after her significant other died or if it was even before, like it was almost an obsessive relationship.
Yeah.
That I know that about her, but just there's not a whole lot else that you get to know about her, like what her career was or...
No.
Trained as an engineer in school is all you know.
Yeah.
And that she supposedly was working for a startup and doing well. But
Right.
that's it.
In the beginning of the book, she has a very close relationship with the last named character we're going to talk about, Armand, but you don't know what the relationship is. You just know that they're really close.
They're close.
Yeah. You do find out later on in the book that the two of them are twins.
Twins.
So that makes more sense as you go along. But other than that, like I just really couldn't get a feel for her, other than she had very little patience for anything. Like
yes.
Even her brother, like there just was no patience whatsoever. And she had this long-standing grief obsession with her boyfriend that died 5 years ago.
So it's not like it's been a year and it was raw. This is 5 years ago. Yeah.
I thought that Helena was calculated.
Yeah.
That she was
Bingo.
she only released what she wanted people to know and was very manipulative, but I mean, calculated and manipulative are the same thing.
Yeah.
Her persona was controlled to give the appearance she wanted, and she kept everything close to the vest.
And towards the end of the book, it's kind of revealed that she's always angry, and whether that anger is because of Vikinger's death or because of that's just who she is. But you learn that a lot of her personality is anger, which is interesting because they also say that she was the one who in other social settings got along very easily with other people, which again goes into that calculated nature.
But that's the chameleon. That's
the chameleon. That can be the narcissist. That can be the psychotic personality. They can do whatever they need to.
We'll touch on that later in the plot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I see her in that light.
Yeah.
Is the reason she comes across that way is because she plays the chameleon all the time.
Right.
Because
she is willing to be whatever she has to be
to get what she needs.
To get what she wants or to angle a situation for her betterment down the road.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Okay, so now we have Armand. Did I say his name right? Okay. He's like the problem child.
Oh, I didn't like him at all.
Yes.
He made me so mad.
He is I actually felt the most sympathetic to him the longer I went into the story, only because I felt like he was being used and manipulated continually by his sister.
No, because
wait, let's talk about him first.
Yes.
He travels to, is it Denmark?
Copenhagen.
Yeah.
He lived in Copenhagen, Denmark. Yeah.
Gets involved in drugs, is dealing, is using, and then gets on the bad side of a bad group of people, and they beat the crap out of him. And his sister Helena goes to get him and brings him home. And he starts making something of himself. He develops these tour companies, outdoor adventure companies, guides, and is doing really well at the start of this story. He's making money, but he is constantly telling people how good he's doing, how much money he's making, and how successful he is. So Julia, why did you not like him?
Oh, he's so arrogant. Oh my gosh, he's so arrogant.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
Yeah.
He is self-assured.
Yes.
And yet everybody else gave to him to bail his keister out, and yet he acts like he's everything.
It was the invincibility complex was also pretty rampant, thinking that nothing was going to happen, that because he runs this tour guide company, he knows everything that's going on in this land, and a snowstorm isn't going to bother him, and oh my gosh, if you just listen to me, we'll get out of this okay. Like, it just felt very... I am the leader. Don't question me. I know what I'm doing.
I wonder if it's the way it was read.
Welcome to the world of someone who runs a business and feels like that is the position they have to take because everything relies on
I'm not arguing.
No, I'm just saying. I just maybe I could associate having run a business for a while that's that sense of I don't have the option to not say we're not going to find a solution. Like you have to have that a little bit of that mentality.
I'm just sitting here wondering if the narrator read him so that you got that impression.
Because we didn't. We didn't have quite that impression.
But I think I want to take. It wasn't just because he owned the business. That wasn't my issue, and it maybe could have been how it was read. But I didn't. And I listened closely for any specific emphasis on any reading, and I didn't really hear anything. I think it was just more the nature of even how he questioned Danielle or Gunnlauger, or how he led certain situations but wouldn't listen to other opinions. I think it was outside of that business aspect that made me feel
I
that
get
way.
I get that. But when you understand what in the plot was going on between Armand and Helena,
Sure.
you know that he was playing the role of making sure everything worked out.
Right. No,
Right? So, I mean, there's
I
a certain
get
side of
that.
when you understand the plot and you get a feel for what really is going on. Part of his character is that she was using him to do exactly what his persona was.
Yes. But also in the chapters, the way that the chapters are written, and we'll get to this when we get to writing, it's told third person, but also in thoughts.
Yeah.
And when you look at the chapters with his thoughts, the way that he perceives other people also highlights this arrogance
It does.
as
He
well.
is very condescending to other people.
So I think
Absolutely.
that's where it lay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
But if Gunnlauger is one of your friends, really? I mean, come on. Okay.
let's talk about Vikinger.
Vikinger.
Okay, how should we say it?
Vikinger.
I can't roll my
I'm
R's.
so sorry.
He is
Vikinger.
a character in this story, but he is not physically present.
Correct.
He is a friend of Daniel's that Helena fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 years ago, when they were still in school, he was found in the Highlands, frozen to death.
Mm-hmm.
And this actual thing is really the driving force underneath the whole plot of the story. You don't know that right away, but it becomes apparent till the end of the book. And even you see two different representations of him. Helena is his girlfriend, and she thinks he's perfect. He absolutely had no issues. He was just this wonderful boyfriend. They fit together like a hand in glove. He was wonderful. But if you get Daniel's side of the story, he had a different opinion of Vikinger, that he was argumentative and stubborn and had his own
temper
issues.
outburst issues.
Yeah. So we don't see him in the story as a person, but he plays a big role.
Yeah.
Plays a huge role.
Anybody have anything else to add about him?
I think what I want to say is I can understand why Helena is so focused on him, because if the Highlands where he was found was not an easy place to get to. Like, it's not like he just took a little walk and got lost. Like, he was in the Highlands.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand for years why she was like, how did he get there? What happened? What's going on? I can understand that level of perseveration.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how Vikinger becomes like this ghost in the show, or in the book, that is kind of the propellant of everything.
Right. I was telling your dad, it's like he's a MacGuffin, which is a term for something in a story that isn't actively there, but pushes the plot
so much
line
more.
along.
Yeah.
And he's definitely driving the entire plot of this story.
One of the things that I reflected on that was interesting regarding him as a character and the abandoned in the Highlands is we were there.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that fly into Keflavik with a backpack, hitchhike, don't even pay for the buses, hitchhike to different locations, backpack hike, stay out in the wilderness for 3 or 4 days, hitchhike back to the airport and fly home. The ability of someone to have gotten a ride out into the Highlands hitchhiking
is possible.
is very possible.
Yeah.
We saw people hitchhiking all the time.
Yeah.
They'd land at the airport and I'm not renting a car, I'm not paying for the bus fare, just hitchhike.
Yeah.
And it happened all the time. So it's just an interesting overtone of that I thought about and reflected on, having been in Iceland, to know that that's common fare. People hitchhike all over the place.
Yeah.
Now, the ring road out into the Highlands, but there are people in 4-wheel drives going everywhere, all over the place, all the time. And so it's just it was just something I reflected on regarding the perception he as a character got into a location where he could never have been on his own and died, and she's 5 years later, this is driving everything about who she is.
Yeah.
Helena.
Yes. I think the other thing about Vikinger, and this is going to get to some of my gripes with the characters as a whole, in the later scenes where we kind of figure out what happened to Vikinger, I'm just going to say it right now, Daniela is involved.
Mm-hmm.
And what really frustrated me about the relationships in this book is they're not represented in a way that makes you think they actually like each other in any way, shape,
you'd
or
think
form.
they just barely put up with each other at best.
And so in this, I didn't get any sense of like, thinking about Vikinger in that last scene, Danielle did kind of what was reasonable. If you're fighting with people, obviously you're going to like... peace out.
Well, and especially if the guy wasn't willing to get back in the car with
you're in a very unique situation.
Totally.
But I just, across the board, between the four characters and everybody, like nobody liked each other. Right. Why go on a weekend away with people you don't like?
That was my whole issue, is why in the world?
Why fly from London 2 hours one way, land, go out in the woods when you've never, or go out in the highlands when you've never hunted.
Right.
Never hunted.
Why would you do that?
With people you didn't... much deeper issues that we can address
we can
later,
talk
but
about that in the relationships part of it.
Yes.
We have one more person we want to talk about, and that is the weird dude in the shelter that was locked in because they had to break the lock to get the door open. He was locked in the shelter, sitting in the corner, wide awake, staring into space with
holding
a gun.
Well, he could have very easily. They suggested that those huts were used for a refuge and that they usually are unlocked. But if somebody might be in there, it could be locked, and they had to beat the lock off to get in. He could have gotten there when it was totally unlocked and locked himself in.
But didn't it also get revealed that the door wasn't actually locked?
I don't know.
Was just part of
it may have been part of the shtick, and them beating on the lock was a sign for him to get in position.
Well, that was the first thing that, like,
it just didn't seem to make sense. Yeah. But he's an unnamed face, just a person in the hut holding a shotgun, like he would have been hunting ptarmigan as well, but just sitting there. Nameless, faceless, just unresponsive, sitting there with a gun.
That would be unnerving.
In what they thought was a small shack that had four beds, two bunk beds, and a table.
Enough to just be safe.
No furnace, nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those are our characters in the story. We only have 5 real characters and 1 ghost that's hanging over everything. Let's talk about atmosphere. What did you think about the atmosphere?
Cold. It opens up in a blizzard.
So
it's cold.
Right. So this is part of why this book was so unique to me. For context, we did a hike as a family from
called the Fimmvörðuháls.
Fimmvörðuháls. It's from the famous Skogar waterfalls on the south side of Iceland. But it goes to a remote campground 15 miles north, and you hike up over 2 glaciers, or between 2, Myrdalsjökull and Eyjafjallajökull. But the one is the volcano that erupted 15, 20 years ago that blocked all the travel in Europe. Right? But it's snow covered. So we hiked up through 15-mile hike up over into snowfields, into snow fog that you could hardly see where you were going, down over.
And then came down into Thorsmark.
And then came down into a remote campground, Thorsmark. Right out of the Shire. This book, the minute it starts out, blowing snow, hiking up, all I could think of was the times we stopped and went, are we on the doorstep of hell, or where are we? Are we dying? Are we going to get through?
Foggy.
Are we going to make it?
That was probably the hardest. That section of the hike was the hardest I've ever done.
That's right.
Yes,
so we
did a
lot
of mental effort.
Yeah, well, and the up down through the snow.
That's exactly the up and down. So we would see a spot a quarter mile away over the other side, and you had to go down 600 feet into like a dome of snow and then up the other side, but it was in snow. There were no steps. We're in hiking. It's like you're slogging, you're slush. You're like every step you take, you slide back half the distance. I remember that in great detail.
Oh, so do I.
I was personifying that as the characters are slogging to a place they can't see. They don't know where they're going. That sense of in the fog, in the snow. You could be 10 feet from where you were, and we passed a young set of 2 girls without the right gear that we feared they might not make it.
Right.
I still think about them occasionally.
I do too.
Now, there were huts that you had to reserve. Hopefully they got to one and people just said you can stay here.
I thought we were past them at that point.
Well, there was one other one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But my point is, we had a personal experience that really made this scene.
Yeah.
Snow fog, snow, blizzard in the middle of nowhere.
I think
feel real.
I know for me that my personal experience is what made the book probably more enjoyable to me than if I would have just read it cold turkey. I can say that for sure. It brought back a lot of really wonderful memories of being in Iceland, and I could picture what was probably happening and where it was happening.
Yeah.
So definitely cold and snowy. What do you think about the shelter part of it? Like, what was the atmosphere there?
Uneasy.
Yeah.
It was so uneasy. And I think part of that too goes back to being in a secluded place with people that you don't feel welcomed by, or that you don't feel
that
liked.
you don't like.
Right.
And then add into that a weirdo.
Right. All of it just felt very...
You don't understand why he's there, what's wrong with him.
It's one of those situations...
Why does he have a gun?
Yeah. One of those situations that you go into having a premonition that it's not going to go well.
I shouldn't open this door. I
should
really
not step
should.
foot.
That's right.
I need to go back the other way.
Yeah.
But because of the blowing snow and... There it was blowing snow in a blizzard. For us, it was snow fog.
Right.
But
Which
you kept right on the trail or where you saw footprints,
you
or
did
you
not
were getting
step
lost.
off.
No.
Exactly.
No. Right. So I mean, that sense of so easily to get lost, and now that I'm here, I have no other option. I have to stay with the people I'm with.
Yeah.
I have no other option.
I definitely, the atmosphere fits a thriller atmosphere. It's uneasy. It's stressful. It feels like they're high stakes because they're trying to survive. Now you have this guy with a gun. Is he going to shoot somebody? Then Helena and Daniel go back out into the blizzard. Are they going to make it?
Yeah.
Then Daniel's by himself. Like, it's just all this stressful, anxious action.
And the uncertainty comes from multiple facets.
Yeah.
It comes from uncertainty of horrible weather elements. We all have to deal with that. It comes from the uncertainty of a person they didn't expect to be there who looks threatening.
Yeah.
Then it comes from the fact that in their own thoughts, they're realizing all their friends aren't friends and they're all
Something's
bad
not right.
people,
Yeah.
right? They all are going in there, as you described it, Julia. It's written by the person in third person, but then it's their thoughts and it's tidbits of history and background get thrown in all the time. And you're going, each character is realizing, these aren't my friends. Like, I'm in a blizzard at a place I can't get out of, that I don't know, with a person who's a mystery stranger with a gun, and the people I thought were my friends aren't my friends.
Yeah.
The author makes this statement numerous times that I thought was a really clever. The cards had been redealt.
Yeah.
So it's like a hand, and I currently in this hand, I don't really have a good play.
Yeah.
And then we put our cards in and we get a new set of cards, and now I have an ace and a king, right? And the cards were redealt. And you, as the story just changes, each person is realizing how these aren't my friends.
Yeah.
So they're not only are they in a foreign place, not only are they in extreme weather conditions, not only is there a stranger with a gun, they're realizing the people who they were their lifeline, their friends, aren't their friends.
Yeah.
And actually far worse.
Right. Something I want to add here, but I think it's going to go kind of both with characters and writing.
Okay. Well, we might as well. We'll just segue right into writing then.
Perfect. I think what was the turning point for me with this level of unease was at the point when Helena and Danielle were going to go out. But first Armin says, hey, I know where this is. I'll lead. And then it so quickly switches to Helena when she didn't know where it was.
She didn't know where
to
it
me,
was.
that was the immediate marker of something's not right here.
Yeah.
Something is not going to go right. And now from here on out, people are going to die. Like, that was my marker. And it took that unease factor up even higher because I knew that there was something going on that I just could not pinpoint.
Yeah, and I think Daniel's character, in his own thoughts at that point, says something like, I had a feeling like this wasn't the right thing to do, and yet I'll go do it.
Yeah.
Like that perception of group pressure to be the hero.
Yeah.
Right.
And he gave into everything in his mind is going, alarm bells, this doesn't seem right, what's going on?
But then he did something totally out of character and went.
And went.
When he was really pretty cowardly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move into writing. What did you think about the writing? Well, I should say before we jump into that, just remember it is translated. It also is third person omniscient, which means that the story is told from an omniscient narrator, third person, and the narrator is in everybody's head. So you're getting their thoughts.
Their thoughts.
The chapters are broken down by character. So we hear Helena, Daniel, Gunnlaugur, and Armand's actual thoughts during the whole process of what's going on. What did you think?
I don't know if it was the translation or not. I liked for this thriller, because it was just 4 people and they were isolated. I liked the use their thoughts and what's going on. Because
changing from person to person.
Yeah. I mean, because 3 in a row or 4 in a row might be the same brief vignette, but from each person's perspective. So I'm trying to give an example, but as they break into the hut on their hike up and they finally think they found refuge. First, there's Armand and Helena getting in the door. And then surprise, and Daniel's still outside. And then it goes to Daniel, and the thoughts and stuff is kind of what he's having as they're getting to the hut. Finally, a place to be safe, and then utter shock.
And you still don't know what they saw.
You still don't know what the shock is.
Because Gunlauger was the first one in, and he yelled. Yeah.
So there's this, even within each character in certain sections, you're seeing a scene backed and rewound just a little bit and seeing other parts. And I enjoyed that part of the perspective.
Yeah.
But I would agree. I think you said earlier on, whether it was a translation or not, there just seemed to be a little clunkiness sometimes in some of the either dialogue thought or the
weird
way in which
use
it was
of
described.
prepositions. Like I just some weird word choices for me.
And I think that's just translation.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was just solid utilitarian writing to get the story across. Yeah. I wasn't expecting anything lovely or spectacular as far as skill. It just
overly descriptive.
Yeah,
no. Yeah, no. A lot of the espionage thrillers that I like to read, early in the book, the chapters are a little longer, and then as it gets to the end, they get shorter and shorter. And that same thing occurred. So you're flipping to this person's thought and that person's thought, and the tension is just being ratcheted up.
And
it's
the
not
pace
a
picks up.
6, 8, 10 page person's thoughts and rambling. No, it's 1.5, 2 pages, and you're on to the next person as they're dealing with just the pressure cooker getting tighter and tighter. And so from those elements and the way it was structured as a thriller, as it got to what was really the end, till we get to the end,
right?
I appreciated the way in which the author was really trying to ratchet up tension and fear and discontent between the characters and each other and everything else. Yeah.
Anything else, Julia?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed with all of that. You mentioned earlier, Dad, about how little things are revealed about the characters throughout the book, and I definitely picked up on that, and I appreciated that, and I think that's an example of just really good stellar thriller writing when it's done subtly. And I think that's also I think I was saying to you, Mom, pretty early when I started the book about like nobody likes each other, and I could just tell that people aren't perceiving each other right. And knowing how by the time that we got to the end of the book, I was like, okay,
see, that
it all
makes
makes
sense.
It all makes sense. So I don't want to say that I liked that part of the writing because it's a thriller. People die. I don't, you don't want to like that.
That's
but
it worked.
It did. Yeah. And I think it's what kept things interesting as I was trying to figure things out, waiting for the next thing to drop.
Yeah. Yeah. So in all honesty, I read the book back in June of last year, 2023.
Yeah.
And so in the last week, I skimmed through to refresh, right? One of my complaints was some of the murder mysteries that your mom and I watch on BritBox and some other British.
Acorn
some
TV.
that are very good, but there's some that you've watched it for 80 minutes and it's solved in the 83rd minute of 85 or 86 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It's solved in the 85th minute, and it has to do with somebody who was mistreated 25 years ago, and nowhere in the story could you have ever gleaned that bit of information. Yeah. So you sit there watching it and you're okay, so we can write this guy out because they're trying to make him look like he is the bad guy. So I'm just by default, I'm going to say it's not him. And we're starting to think through who might it be. And you get to the end, you go, well, there's no way we could have ever figured that out. So, in transparency, when I was skimming back through this, I saw more and more and more of these little drops where the author did a really good job that if you're really attuned to thinking about a mystery and a thriller, certain phrases, little one-lines, little things come back to you.
Yeah.
And as your mind in the background, mine is, I'm trying to figure out what's really going on. There's always subterfuge. There's always a hidden plot. There's always something deeper. What is it? This author, at least, there was a lot of breadcrumbs thrown down.
Yeah.
Subtle, very subtle, but a lot thrown down that you may not have known exactly what was going on, but you had a premonition.
Yeah.
That keeps pulling you into the story, and that was done well.
Yeah. The example that comes to my mind, when they're at the first hut before they make this journey in, and Armand is asking Danielle if he has a flashlight, and they're going through the backpack or whatever. And Armand makes a comment about, I'm prepared for these things because of my bit, whatever. And then Danielle, out of his insecurity, says something about, well, I'm a good actor, whatever. Yeah. But in the parallels of that, you see Armand say, why does he always have to boast about it? Where Danielle is like, why is he always
talking about his business.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the way that
Lots of testosterone there. Lots of like comparison.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
thanks,
sorry.
Mom. I think the way that Ragnar did this and made it so obvious that nobody trusted each other and that they didn't think well of each other
Yeah.
set this tension and unease so prevalent so early on.
Yeah.
I think helped set up the fallout
Oh, yeah.
of the book
Oh, yeah.
later
Yeah.
on.
Oh yeah. And ultimately plot wise in that writing.
Let's just move on to the plot then.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. So say what you're going to say.
You're sitting there going, where does this ultimately go? If I was one of 4 people
Mm-hmm.
and we were at a lodge and then we were going to go hunting
Mm-hmm.
and hike way up into the highlands
Mm-hmm.
and maybe have to stay at a hut
Mm-hmm.
and not take provisions with us. If on the night before one of the 4 guys had tried to rape my sister,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm calling it quits.
I'm calling. We're not going right. So you immediately start to go, okay, there is some greater motive because he and she both were willing to endure what they knew was virtually an attempted rape
Yeah.
for the purpose of something,
Right.
Yeah.
which means there was something far greater than the 4 of us are just going to go shoot a few
Yeah.
ptarmigans, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to shoot a few ptarmigans? No, there was something far greater going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me was a dead giveaway early on that I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't know at that point that there was a relationship.
Between
Of that
like
kind.
that.
Of that
Yeah.
kind.
You
Yeah.
don't
But
know
still,
that until
one of the 4 tries to rape one of the other 4.
Yeah.
And we're just going to forget it and go on with our
and
trip.
move on, pretend like it didn't happen, or
Yeah.
just brush it aside. Yeah,
No.
no,
Especially when the other characters knew that he had done that before.
right.
Right.
They all
So-
did,
Right.
too.
And they all did.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Which, okay, I know we've said this a lot already, but like, why spend time with people you don't like? Why do that?
That's my biggest.
Why do that?
But a lot of thrillers are like that. You find you're reading about a group of people who, on the surface, are supposedly best buds.
Secret
and then-
History.
Well, The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley
Okay.
is the same thing, except it's in the Scottish Highlands in the middle of a snowstorm.
Great. Love that.
At
Yeah.
this very
Yeah.
ritzy lodge,
Yeah.
and they're all stuck together in this place. Yeah.
So I would also argue after 4 years of living on a college campus and they described their first class where they kind of all kind of sat near each other. Daniel was trying to go to the corner.
Yeah. And
But
they were
Helena
in
and
his
Armand
corner.
were already in the corner, and then he sat in an area where he thought he could get away from Gunlauger, right? So there's these early friendships that people make when you're in like a new environment. There's a lot of people that knew people in college. They're like, you know what? I don't need to maintain that friendship any further.
Right.
Yeah.
But for whatever weird reason,
They just keep
they
doing
just
it.
keep going back to the same well.
And okay, because I'm a defender of people, I generally have to play fair. I have like growing up when I was dealing with all of my anxiety with building friends, whatever. I know I have been in situations where I have not made bad decisions, but I've made decisions that kept me in situations that maybe were doing things I didn't want to, but because I wanted to be accepted by that group of people and I wanted to keep friends. And it wasn't until I got much older that my sense of confidence and security in myself changed, that I was like, I don't need to do that anymore. I can make friends another way. So in that regard, I can give them a little bit of leeway that if these were their friends, like I get that you're trying to stay connected and accepted, or in Gunlauger's case, like I get that as well. But I still don't think that condones any of the actions that happen or keeping yourself in a situation that is not safe or not right or is not a benefit to yourself.
Well, and the whole time you're thinking, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Daniel's character was like, what am I just want to be back in London with my
Right.
girlfriend.
I actually want to be with my girlfriend.
You mentioned a word early on, Julia, insecure, when you were talking about Gunlauger, and I think that applies to all 4 of these.
Oh, yes.
in very, very real ways. But I think in many people, when they head off to college, whether they think they're the star athlete or not,
sure.
most people at 18 going away to college, most people deal with insecurity in some at some layer in their own psyche and in their own emotions. And so but I just see like these 4 people got thrown together because of whatever. Daniel and Gunlauger because they were friends, but the other 2. And they just kind of this loose thing kind of tied, but they're stuck in this old rut of what were college friends at the time, but they are all so horribly insecure and broken. And yet that very thing is kind of partly what ties them together is because, hey, at least I'm not as broken as him.
Right.
And so you keep surrounding yourself with people that you think are more broken than you, so you feel good about yourself. If that's, just
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
toxic.
Yeah. Oh, very. That's the perfect word for this. Toxic.
Let's talk a little bit about plot, but we're going to pick up where they're in the cabin with Gunlager and Armand in the cabin with the weird dude.
Right.
And Helena and Daniel have already left to see if they can notify the police or help
Rescue.
Rescue
Mountain
rescue
rescue,
to
yeah.
come get them. Gunlager has started to drink again. Somebody brought brandy. I don't even remember. And
The
that,
night before it started at the lodge.
right, but he's drinking in the shelter as
yes,
well.
because of fear.
Yeah. He and Armand are kind of supposedly taking turns keeping an eye on the dude in the corner. And Helena comes back because she supposedly hurt her foot.
Yeah.
We find out that that was all a setup to leave Daniel out in the elements. But she comes back. They're all awake. And the dude in the corner gets up. And because Gunlager is already beyond being
He's-
on edge, like
yeah.
he is over the top, filled with anxiety and uneasiness, and he shoots and kills the guy that was in the corner. And this is kind of the turning point where everything
Just starts to spiral.
Yeah.
falls to pieces.
Yeah.
And you start finding out that this was all a setup.
Yeah.
The guy in the corner was somebody who worked for Armand. He was an immigrant
Worker, laborer.
Yes.
Just a
Laborer.
laborer.
that he was paying extra because they wanted a witness to what was happening in the cabin.
So they could be unaccountable for what else happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But now they have a dead man who is obviously tied to Armand, who wouldn't be there for any other reason except that he knows him, that people would look into that and it would come back around that something hinky was going on. Okay. So then what happens?
Well, eventually, Daniel comes back
Yeah.
and starts beating on the door to come in. Now, there's a lot of thoughts that go on in the interactions between Armand and Helena and Gunlager.
Yeah.
Realizing that we brought Gunlager along just to be an additional witness. We'd have a lawyer who was a witness that
Yeah.
Daniel went out to rescue us and died in the wilderness,
Yeah.
which was the whole reason for this plot.
Yes.
And eventually, you understand? But now they're dealing with the fact that the idiot they brought along, who they didn't want to bring along,
Yeah.
has now killed somebody.
Right.
And so now they're trying to plan one more subterfuge and way of trying to figure out how to dispose of the body, whatever.
Right. And talk Gunlager into not saying anything, that he killed somebody.
Yeah,
And he's
yeah.
struggling. Well, first he's in shock. Then he's struggling with doing the right thing.
Right.
But he's such a weak character that he allows them to talk him into getting rid of the body and acting like nothing ever happened.
Well, first the idea becomes to burn the whole place down.
yeah.
But Gunlager, I think he tries to fight a little bit at the beginning of like, no, I need to take responsibility for this.
Yeah.
Like, it's my actions. And then I think it's Armand says, well, then you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life.
Right.
And that's what scares him.
Yeah.
And then it goes from there. So
Right.
then when Daniel gets in there in the middle of this conversation of what do we do with the body? Oh, we're going to burn it. Does anybody have a lighter?
Right.
Well, so that's before Daniel gets back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then
And so
Daniel shows
then
up.
Daniel
Yeah.
shows up and he comes in already
Pissed.
pretty much realizing he
Yeah.
was walked out into the blizzard to die.
to die.
And he's ready for
Well, he's concerned about Helena.
Yeah. He doesn't think she
well,
made it back.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
He gets there, sees she's walking around without
Normal.
a limp. Yeah,
Clicks.
and then the light bulb comes
Light
on.
bulb comes on.
And that's when it comes to light that Helena found out that Daniel left Vikinger.
This is after Armand dies, though.
No, yeah, right.
Oh,
this
is
after.
it?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So they were Daniel was starting to confront and Armand realizes our problem here in getting all this quote tidied up because I'm the fixer. My problem is not Gunlager.
It's
I can
Daniel.
make him do whatever.
It's,
Yeah.
yes.
Daniel just grew a spine because he just endured a whole night and
Right.
found his way back.
And now
he
he's
now
mad.
knows
He wants no part
this
of
was a
anything
plot
else.
to kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Armand's surprise attacks in going back to his Copenhagen
Yeah.
drug dealing days and having
Is
fights.
pretty sure he can
right.
overcome Daniel and kill him,
That's right.
which is exactly what he
and he
plans
flat
on doing.
out punches him and launches at him and
Yeah.
knocks him on the ground. But when he stands up to try to decide, if he's standing over his prey, Daniel kicks out and hits him right in the face
He falls back and
and
hits his head.
smashes his nose.
Right.
And then he goes to lunge at him again, and Daniel knocks him over, and he lands and splits his head open.
Which I think is important to note, that both of the people that die in this book are accidental.
Yes.
There's nothing that is, well, there's premeditated, but it didn't happen.
It didn't work. Yeah.
The two people that do actually die, it was not intentional. Like, and I think that's what's interesting with Gunlauger is there's the examination of what Iceland laws are like in terms of murder and self-defense. Like, there's no possibility of a self-defense. Where in like here in America, you could make an argument of self-defense, and
you'd have to prove that you were truly in
and that's
danger.
hard in the current situation, but it might lessen.
And Daniel might get a 3-year manslaughter because in the course of a fight, someone died.
Right. Yeah.
But if that person beat you in the head and attacked you and you fought out to protect yourself, you would get a lot of leniency before the court for you have the right to defend your own life.
Right. So it was a side note, a pin in all of this was that it was an interesting examination of the difference of laws. And there's the word I'm looking for that I can't pull in my head, but how that differs from Iceland to America.
Jurisdictional differences in jurisprudence.
Yeah. And you said something that I don't think I ever fully thought about is that they were both accidental deaths, the deaths in this book. Because a lot of times in thrillers, people are dying, but they're dying purposefully. So you get to the murderer and understand why.
And the intended murder leave somebody out in the woods, which really was not traceable to being, quote, a murder.
No,
but
they would just have died. You could explain the whole situation.
It would have been very sneaky.
But the one that began with planned intent.
Yes.
So it is a planned death. Yes. They were planning to kill him by exposure, by leading him out into the wilderness.
And this was all Helena because she found out that Daniel left her boyfriend, Vikingur, out in the Highlands, and he froze to death.
And she only found out because of a security camera that caught them at a gas station. That was only recent, like in the past couple of months before this.
Right.
Up until that point, she had no.
So
and then she tracked back that he hadn't been at work that day,
and she put it
made
all
sure
together.
that he not didn't know that he did anything other than he left him out there. That's all she knew.
And then the other Vikingers was an accident too. Like none of this was.
No, I know none of it was premeditated. Yeah, exactly.
None of it.
But she was so angry with Daniel, and she had such obsessive opinion of Vikingur that she couldn't see that he would have fought with Daniel, wouldn't get in the car. Daniel left. Now, I have issues with Daniel that he never came back.
Or turned around
went to bed, got up the next day. Like there was no, I wonder what's happening. I haven't seen.
Should I go check?
My friend.
Yeah.
That's why I said every single person here is so despicable.
And yet
they all need Jesus.
Yet in that Daniel would have never been like, I didn't drive out there to leave him. We went out for a hike and he got pissed and walked off and said, leave me alone. And so I left.
Yeah.
Right. There's no malicious intent.
Yeah.
There were two people that got into a fight and the one guy got out of the car I was driving. I was prepared to drive him back to town. He got out.
Right.
I said, I'm walking. Okay.
So we learn all of this at the end after everyone has died. And so you have Helena, who's the orchestrator of all this. I mean, she even manipulates her brother to do what she needs to have happen. So she's left with Gunlauger, whom she completely despises, Daniel, which she wanted to kill, and herself.
Yeah.
And now they all have to trust each other and leave together and have the same story so that.
And then she ends up manipulating the story at the end too, where she's like, this is what happened. We went out to shoot and we came back.
3 of us went out. They were here. We came back. There must have been a fight. This was one of his workers. He wanted to become a partner. He was threatening Armand. They got into a fight.
Yeah.
And we came back and it was like this.
Yeah. But she turned on a dime. After her brother died, she was like, I can just take over his businesses.
I can run it better than he can.
I can run it better. Yeah. Like she immediately turned.
This is we have watched way too many murder mysteries from BritBox and British murder mysteries. And maybe this is an Agatha Christie holdover that is coming out of his previous, taking her stories and translating them.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right. But how many times in the last have I told you, well, it's one of 3 or 4 people, but I'm going to always guess it's the woman. Right. No. No. Listen to me a second. No. And how many of these, the violent, emotional, you really ticked me off and I kill you is the man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
The
a
woman
statistic.
is that I'll sit
The
on this for
devious.
5
Yes.
years and I will
10,
connive and I
20.
will figure out how to make it look like an accident and I will
Yeah.
get you.
That's
Yeah.
very
The last line in this
statistics.
book is her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel doesn't know it, but I'm still coming for him.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
devious, I will outweight you. I'll outlast you.
Yeah.
But if I want revenge, I will get you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 9 times out of 10, if that's my guess on one of the murder mysteries on BritBox, I'm right.
It's gonna. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm just
will
saying.
say
Literary.
that I hated the ending to this book. Not because we found out it was Helena who was behind it. It just felt like it stopped so abruptly. Almost like Ragnar just was done writing. Didn't have anything else to say.
Used it up.
Wasn't quite sure how to wrap it up, so he just
It's like,
stopped.
I don't like these characters anymore. Done.
Right. I mean, in the book, there are some intros to some other books he's written. I actually started reading the first one thinking it was the next chapter in the story.
Yeah.
So I just was a little unsatisfied with the ending.
Yeah, I get that. The way I thought that through or gave him a little grace, I guess, there was that the scene that led to all the stress was the blizzard and the hut
Mm.
and the unknown man. And as soon as you killed off the unknown man, 1/3 of the stress is gone.
Mm-hmm.
They said the morning was breaking and the blizzard was done.
Mm-hmm.
He bled off all of the stress points that made the thriller get so intense. It's it's kind of like as soon as like, is it going to blow? Is it going to blow? Oh, it blew. Well, that's the end of the story.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
And so the blizzard was gone. The daylight was coming. The stranger
Yeah.
was gone. All the suspense was gone. Like there was nothing else to do.
I know.
It just,
there
it was.
I just felt like it could have been wrapped up a little bit
Yeah,
better.
I get it.
Well, and I think I agree, but I think it's also interesting how it's left. Like we don't see them get back. We don't know
That's
what
what I
happens
mean.
about
Yeah. There's
We
anything
just know
else.
the story they prepared.
Right.
Yeah.
And that she's prepared to get Daniel at some point.
at some point.
right, and we know that nobody's friends anymore, and
Well,
nobody's
yeah.
going to see each other anymore.
That's it.
But I mean that
No.
Daniel makes it
We
very clear to
assume
Gunlander
that,
is
but-
that no
Yeah.
more. I think that that's kind of what makes this story interesting for me, and that you just kind of have to assume that everything is going to work out the way that they said.
Or
That
not.
cliffhanger
Yeah.
is an interesting addition to how the story already played out.
Yeah.
The sad thing in all of this is that an immigrant worker lost his life.
Right.
Of the 4
Innocent.
friends, they all were wretched. They were wretched to each other. They had done bad things, all this kind of garbage. You have no idea about that character. And all he did was go sit in a hut and spend 12 hours in a hut and get killed and make
Yeah.
extra money.
Yeah.
And in most of those immigrant worker scenarios, they're sending all that cash back to
to their
family that
family.
are struggling,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so here's this guy that loses his life, and all he did was his boss, who he looked up to, said, "Hey, you can make 3 weeks worth of wages in one night.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
hike to this
And
cabin,
sit
sit there
there,
with a
don't
gun,
say anything.
don't say a word. I'll talk to you. Don't say a word.
Yeah.
We're going to be there for a while and then move on."
Yeah.
And he loses his life for nothing.
Right,
For these
and-
4 reprobate,
Yeah.
quote,
Yes.
friends that just treat each other like garbage.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to intrigue or interest. Were you intrigued or interested in the story the entire time?
Oh yeah, I mean, again, having been in that part of the world,
Mhm.
been in that country, been out there, I've been out in the woods in the cold hunting. There was enough elements that kept me. I want to know what's going on.
Sure.
Definitely.
Sure.
I mean,
and the
I-
writing style kept me pulled in.
Right. I read this in 2 sittings.
Mhm.
I wanted to know what happened. It was very easy, quick reading. I did not like anybody, but it didn't seem to matter
Didn't
because I
matter.
wanted what kind of ridiculous car crash was coming up and I wanted to see it happen. And I wanted to see it resolved. And I think that I just didn't get the resolution I wanted to. But it definitely took me on the ride I was expecting for a thriller.
Yeah, when you realize they're all reprobate in some way, that they all have their own dark demons and past histories, and they want to blame everybody else for bad things, but they themselves have been
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
There's a certain side of, yes, it's going to blow up. I just am intrigued as to where the parts fall when it finally happens.
Who's going to be
Who's
in
left
pieces
standing?
parts,
Yeah.
See, I just don't like books with characters I don't like.
Yeah, I do struggle with that a little bit. I like to have at least somebody I can
Yeah.
not necessarily root for, but at least enjoy spending time in their head. And I
So,
didn't hear.
okay, I'm totally going to out myself on this, but this is so silly. You know when like somebody tells you something and you don't think of a good like comeback in that moment, you think about it like later on. There were actually
That's my whole life. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Mom. But there were actually times in this book where Armand specifically or Helena would say something and I'd actually have to pause it out loud and verbalize what I would say in response. I hated them that much. And then I had to take a minute and be like, all right, this is just a book. And then I had to keep it moving.
That was cathartic. I'll keep reading.
Right. But I found them so unlikable, and even the redeemable, in quotations, qualities that I did find were not enough for me to be like, okay, I want to see this.
It's
through.
hard.
Right.
It's hard to care. It's hard to care about what is happening to these people. You're fine. Like I was fine that Armand bit the dust.
I might have cheered.
You might
And I
have
don't like
cheered.
feeling like that
Yeah.
as a human being.
I
No,
agree.
that's right.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, I will say that part of the intrigue and the interest for me was thinking through how they couched this: a successful business owner in the tourism trade, a successful engineer, and she just bought a new flat, and a lawyer, and yet an actor in London, and yet, you know, we walk around people every day that the mask of everything is good, and yet there's a lot of dark things in the closet, and a lot of things that people want to keep hidden and probably should at this point stay hidden, but that has led to a lot of darkness. It just, in these particular characters, it comes out and it overwhelms the lives they're trying to make because of just past being really, really mean to each other, having raped somebody, having left a friend to die. I mean, sorry, he was your friend.
You're
You
right.
may have had an argument, but he was your friend.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and yet a young woman who for 5 years has plotted and planned how to kill somebody she claims is a friend.
Well, and was happy to use her brother to accomplish
For any
it
ends,
and
any
bring
means.
him in
Yeah.
and make him
The big guy.
liable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we always get to this part in the discussion where we're talking about relationships and logic, and we basically cover all of that in everything we've
Everything
already
else.
said. So do you have anything else you want to add as far as logic? Did you feel like it was a logical story? Thrillers are weird with this because the whole setup isn't like, it's not something you would expect in a real life situation.
On the logic side, it didn't make logical sense 100% for me. Why? Because I pretty much had a sense with the way he kept going back to the relationship between Vikinger and Helena, that she was the motivation.
Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of had a pretty good sense that was the case. And you don't get it revealed that Armand is actually her twin until later on. So it was a little illogical that this other guy friend from college would seem to be controlling and helping her to manage or manipulate what seemed to be, as you start to think back, like Daniel's character, this just doesn't make sense. I have this intuition, something's not right, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. No. That's why God gave you intuition. When you get that in the pit of your stomach, you listen. You don't go ahead with it. No. And but part of that is that you didn't know that Helena and Armand were twins.
Right.
And so you knew they had a special relationship, but you didn't. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so why would she just trust him with her life? Yeah. She didn't trust any of the other three friends. She hated him.
Yeah.
Why'd she just trust him while he was a drug dealer and do all this? And then when you learn now. Yeah. But yet, then you realize how much she was manipulating him.
And how much
hey, I'm calling in the cards. I saved you from Copenhagen. Yeah. You're going to help me kill Daniel.
Yeah. And just the relationships were, we've said this over and over again, just so much underlying distrust and competition and even hatred. Like I think Helena hated Gunnlauger.
Disgust.
Yeah, disgust.
She did.
So it was hard. It was hard for me to buy the fact that they all were going out on this weekend trip anyway. Like from the get-go, I struggled with that.
Yeah.
But you needed to set up the situation to make it happen.
She admitted they were out to kill Daniel, and we needed a patsy, and you were the patsy, Gunnlauger. Yeah. You were our star witness.
Yep. Okay, our final category for Call Pile is enjoyment. So briefly, do you want to say what your level of enjoyment was for the book overall?
I was, as a thriller goes, and do I keep turning pages and want to keep reading it? that's exactly what it did. I may not like the characters. I may think they're garbage, whatever, but I could start to put faces to people I knew in college who I thought, that's who that guy is right there. You know, that kind of a thing. So the characters were real enough in that way to me. I enjoyed the read. I sat down and read right through it. It was, for me, it wasn't you read so much faster than me, but I was also at the beach. I was going to the beach.
It's a perfect beach read.
But I read it in just, 2.5 days, just at the times I was reading when I wasn't at the beach or at the pool. Because I just wanted to keep reading. And so that captured me. And that's what the answer is.
Yeah. Julia?
So I don't like books with characters I don't like. I think I rated this one about 3 stars, but that just comes down to the story itself. Reading a book from Iceland was super cool because, again, I could picture everything. I knew what the setting was. When they were talking about Vikingur and Danielle driving out, I was like, hey, I did that. I know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Or in Reykjavik, like I could picture some of these places. So that was really cool. And one of the things I like about Three Peas in a Pod is this is not a book that I think I would have picked up on my own, or if I had picked up, would I have seen it through? So it introduced me to an author that maybe I'm going to investigate in the future. And that's it.
Yeah.
It left just a very interesting taste in my mouth that I just was like, I need to move on right away.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the Brenneman.
Exactly.
An interesting taste that I need to move on.
Hence why there's bread sitting under my microphone.
Brenneman of books.
Well, I would probably rate it more like a 4 or around a 4. I mean, it wasn't the best thriller I've ever read, but again, I think part of that was the translation, right? But the sense and the feel of Iceland and the cold and out and creating a series of things that led to just a really, really pressured stress point. The author did a very good job of that.
Yeah.
And it caused me to keep wanting to read it and to turn the pages. And that's what the real goal was. Yes, the end. But like I said, in a thriller, when you've bled off two or three of the quote pressure cooking scenarios that you've developed to make this stressful, it's hard you don't want to spend 30, 40 pages trying to they rolled off into the sunset and what happened, right? So you get the sense of it just like that. They got away with it or not. I don't know. You don't know, right? So
maybe I should say for context, 4. I also don't like thrillers, so I tend not to read them or rate them.
That's
very
right.
highly.
I knew that I had gummed you up.
You did.
I did. I gummed you up.
I'm just getting beat all over the place with Three Peas in a Podcast, aren't I? Gee.
I enjoyed it. It certainly met all the tick points for thrillers for me. And when I read a thriller, I expect it to be fast-paced and suspenseful and makes me feel uneasy. So it met all the requirements for a thriller. I didn't like the characters. I'm okay with unlikable characters to a point. But after a while, I don't want to be in their head anymore. And I just don't want to spend time with them. And I was starting to feel like that with this. Yeah. Plus, I did feel like the relationships, why they were there was a little bit illogical for me. So I had to overcome that. But I enjoyed it. I don't ask much for thrillers. Like, I want to be entertained. I want to be along for the ride. I want it to be fast. I want to know what happens. And that did all of this. I gave it about a 3-star. I looked at the ratings on Goodreads and it's a 3.06 or something. So people are enjoying it. They're not loving it. It's not an all-time favorite thriller. Right. But it's doing the job, and it would be a perfect pool or beach read or laying around the cabin when you're not doing anything. You just want to read a quick book. It would be fine. I would definitely read more from this author, especially, I mean, he's known for his crime thrillers. Yeah. So I would be interested in seeing what he does. He has a whole series. I think one of them is a series. Just see what else he does. So, yeah. All right. Well, that was a rather long discussion about a short book. It's only, what, 200?
No, it's 320.
320 pages.
Yeah, okay. 300.
Yeah. I think I listened to it in 6 hours, so it's a pretty quick listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we touched on a lot of things that the book sparked, like a lot of discussions that the book sparked. But well, thank you, Jay, for joining us today.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
What were you going to say?
That's why I said, for me, I'd rather read a book and let it marinate, because you start to think about people that have been in your life that exhibit some of those traits and some of the things you didn't like, and why have I maintained friendships with some people that have been weights and anchors in my life and not been willing to say, this just isn't healthy for me. I just, things that you mull over and think about when you process through what characters are like. Yeah. I greatly appreciate the willingness that you had to read it, even though you didn't like it, Julia, and the chance to.
I'm taking a little bit of umbrage though, because you're stating that like I don't contemplate the books I read.
Oh, you do.
Absolutely do.
You just move on so fast. It's just maybe my contemplator works slower than your contemplator.
Right. I have a fast moving contemplator.
I got to find a new gear for my contemplator.
All right, Julia, take us away.
A little deranged.
Close the show before the wheels really fall off.
Okay. Well, Dad, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for this very lively discussion of accidental death and getting lost in the Highlands in Iceland. And
let's go back.
Great.
Yeah.
You want to go ptarmigan hunting with me?
Not ptarmigan hunting.
Let's go in the wintertime. I'm all for that.
Oh, I want to see the Northern Lights.
Absolutely.
I would go soak in the hot springs again, the Blue Lagoon. Let's do it all.
They have some bed or like little single room hotels out in the Highlands that are just glass. Like your whole all four walls are glass.
Sign me up. Let's go right now. I will lay in bed and watch the Aurora Borealis. Let's go. Let's do it. Friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this very lively discussion. And if you've read the book, please let us know if you liked it, what your thoughts were. Is this a book that you would read more of? Or if you're not interested in the book at all, did this episode make you want to read it? All good questions. All good questions. Up next on our docket, we have our quarterly review coming up. This is our first one of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to our previous episode of the good books that we've been reading so far, undoubtedly the next episode is going to be chock full of amazing reads.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to narrow down what I'm going to talk about anyway.
Yeah.
I'm having a great reading year so far.
Yeah, so am I.
Slow down and let it marinate.
I know we ask this all the time, friends and listeners, but it does help us if you would like to give us a rate and a review. It does help us just share our Book Snuggy place with more people. Mm-hmm. Share it with your friends, share it on your social medias. It's the same with anything. If there's something you really like, you want to share it with people. So if you really like us, please share us. Please and thank you. And as just a final big thank you for spending part of your day with us today and for hanging out here in the Book Snug. We'd love to have you join us again in the next chapter.
Bye, friends. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation with us at the Book Snug _podcast on Instagram and at the Book Snug podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.budsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, so famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." And we wholeheartedly agree.